Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive with us.
Always a pleasure.
Today, we're going to be looking at two articles from January 2025, and
Okay.
I think it's safe to say they offer some very different perspectives on what's going on in the world.
Yeah, contrasting is a good word for it.
So we've got this excerpt from a Turkish news website, Evrensel.
Mm-hmm.
The title is "Tu Trump döneminde Avrupa'yı neler bekliyor,"
Okay.
which translates to what awaits Europe in the second Trump era.
Keshish.
And then we also have this opinion piece from the French website Agoravox.
Okay.
And that title is a bit of a mouthful.
All right, let's hear it.
It's on Ukraine. Déjà plusieurs millions de moujiks russes sont morts et pourtant ils avancent encore tels des zombies. Titre ironique bien sûr.
Wow.
Which means, in Ukraine, already millions of Russian moujiks are dead, and yet they still advance, like zombies. Ironic title, of course.
Yeah, you can say that again.
So right away, we have this kind of straightforward news analysis piece.
Right.
And then this very, opinionated and provocative piece.
Yeah, they're coming at it from totally different angles.
And we're going to try to figure out how both of these articles help us understand this really complicated global situation.
Yeah, it's a mess out there.
Especially with Trump back in power and the war in Ukraine still raging on.
Yeah, those are two huge factors that are really reshaping the world.
Exactly. So let's jump right in and start with this Turkish article.
Sounds good.
This piece was written by Yücel Özdemir, and it really digs into the potential economic fallout that Europe might face.
Oh, yeah, because of Trump.
Exactly, because of his policies.
Right, his whole America First thing.
Yeah, so the author is arguing that Trump's protectionist policies could really disrupt the global economy.
Yeah, especially those tariffs he keeps talking about.
You mean the 60% of Chinese goods and 20% on Canadian Mexican?
Yeah, and European goods, too. Don't forget those.
Oh, yeah. Europe is not exempt.
It's like he's trying to start a trade war.
And it's not just talk anymore.
Oh, really?
The article says that the Trump administration is already setting up a new federal agency.
What for?
It's called the External Revenue Service.
Okay.
And it would be responsible for protecting the U.S. market from foreign competition.
Wow, so he's really serious about this.
Yeah, it's a big signal that he's going all in on this America First agenda.
Which might be good for America, but
maybe not so good for the rest of the world.
Yeah, it could really shake things up.
So who's going to be hit hardest by all of this?
Good question.
Well, the Turkish article points to Germany.
Germany, huh? I wouldn't have guessed that.
I know, it's surprising.
But why Germany?
They have this huge export-heavy economy and really close economic ties with the U.S.
So they're vulnerable.
Very vulnerable.
Yeah, any disruption in trade could really hurt them.
Exactly. The article even cites an analysis from the German newspaper Süddeutsche Zeitung.
Okay, and what did they say?
They're predicting that Trump's tariffs could cause something like 300,000 direct job losses.
300,000, that's a lot.
Yeah, and that's just direct losses.
Wow. So the indirect impact could be even bigger.
Yeah, potentially over 1.5 million jobs.
Wow, so it's not just numbers on a spreadsheet.
Right. These are real people's livelihoods.
Absolutely.
And this could affect anyone, even if you're not in Germany.
How so?
If you have investments or business ties to Germany.
Right, it's all connected.
These kinds of global economic shifts can have ripple effects.
Yeah, it makes you think about where you put your money.
Exactly. So it's not just about economics either.
Oh, there's more.
Yeah. The Turkish article also predicts that Europe will become even more politically divided.
Because of Trump.
Yep. They say his policies are going to create all these new tensions, especially when it comes to NATO contributions and the war in Ukraine.
It's like he's throwing a wrench into the whole system.
Exactly. And the author even suggests that Europe could fracture into 3 different factions.
3 factions? What are they?
Well, first, you'd have the pro-U.S. countries.
Like who?
Like Poland and the Baltic states.
That makes sense.
And maybe even Germany because of their economic dependence on the U.S.
Oh, so they might be forced to side with Trump even if they don't agree with him.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And then you'd have the countries that are ideologically aligned with Trump.
You mean the populist nationalist types?
Yep, places like Hungary and Italy where far-right parties are already in power.
Oh, yeah, the ones that Trump was openly supporting during his first term.
Exactly. So it makes you wonder who else might join that group as Trump's policies start to take shape.
Yeah, and what happens to the EU if it becomes this divided?
Right. Can they still make decisions together on big issues like defense and trade?
Big questions.
And then you'd have the third faction, the countries that are trying to distance themselves from the U.S.
Because of Trump.
Yeah, the article suggests that France might lead this movement.
Interesting. So a more independent Europe?
Exactly, one that's not so reliant on the U.S.
But is that even possible in this globalized world?
That's a good question, and I guess only time will tell.
This whole fracturing of Europe thing is a big deal.
It really is. It's a pivotal moment with no easy answers.
And it shows just how much uncertainty Europe is facing right now.
Definitely lots to think about there.
Yeah, no kidding.
So let's switch gears a bit and talk about this French article from Agoravox.
Okay, the one with the provocative title.
Yep. This one tackles the war in Ukraine, but from a very different and maybe even controversial perspective.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
This French article by Chapoutier, it basically questions the numbers we've been hearing about Russian casualties in Ukraine.
Oh, really? So they think the numbers are inflated?
Yeah, basically like we've all been hearing about these massive Russian losses.
Right, the human wave attacks and all that.
Exactly, but this article suggests that might not be the whole story.
Interesting. So what's their evidence?
But first of all, the title itself kind of gives you a clue about where they're going with it.
Oh, yeah, the whole zombie thing.
Right. In Ukraine, already millions of Russian mujiks are dead, and yet they still advance like zombies. Ironic title, of course.
It's definitely catchy.
It's like they're using humor and sarcasm to make their point.
Right, to kind of poke fun at the dominant narratives.
Exactly. And they actually bring up a really interesting source to back up their claim.
Okay.
An article from the Washington Post.
Really? The Washington Post?
Yeah, not exactly known for being pro-Russia.
That's for sure. So what do they say?
Well, this Washington Post article includes an interview with a Ukrainian soldier named Oleg.
Okay.
And he talks about these intense battles he's been in against both Russian and North Korean troops.
North Korean troops? Now that's a whole other can of worms.
We'll get to that later, but for now, let's focus on the Russians.
Oh, okay.
So according to Oleg, the Russians are actually pretty careful about minimizing their casualties.
Really?
Yeah, when they face strong resistance or start taking heavy losses, they tend to just retreat strategically.
So not the mindless human wave attacks we keep hearing about.
Exactly. It sounds like a much more cautious and calculated approach.
That's interesting.
And that's where the French author's skepticism comes in.
Right, because if they're always retreating, how can they be suffering such huge losses?
Exactly. It doesn't really add up.
Unless the Ukrainians are somehow wiping out entire retreating armies.
Which seems unlikely.
Yeah, and to make things even more complicated, the Washington Post article also mentions that the Ukrainian army is facing ammunition shortages.
Oh, wow. So they're running low on ammo.
Yep, which again makes you question how they're managing to inflict these massive casualties on a retreating enemy.
Right. If they're low on ammo, they can't be killing that many Russians.
Exactly. It just doesn't make sense.
So is the French author saying that Russia hasn't lost any soldiers?
Not necessarily. They acknowledge that there have been losses on both sides.
Okay.
But they're really questioning the scale of those losses and the way they're being presented, especially in Western media.
So they think it's being exaggerated.
Yeah. They even cite neutral observers who estimate Ukrainian losses, both dead and wounded, to be around 1 million.
1 million? That's way higher than anything I've heard.
And they say Russian casualties, even at the high end of the estimates, are only around 200,000.
That's a huge difference.
It really changes the picture if those numbers are even close to accurate.
Yeah, it makes you wonder who to believe.
And it brings us back to this theme of propaganda and disinformation that we saw in the Turkish article as well.
Right, the idea that information is being used as a weapon.
Exactly. Both articles, in their own way, are urging us to be more critical of the information we're consuming.
Especially during times of war.
Absolutely, because it's so easy to get caught up in the propaganda and lose sight of the truth.
Now, this French article goes on to make another pretty bold claim about the supposed involvement of North Korean soldiers in this whole thing.
North Korea. Wow, things are getting really interesting now.
Yeah, this is where the author really leans into the satire.
Okay, on all ears, tell me more.
So the article points out that despite all the media coverage, there's actually very little concrete evidence to support these claims that thousands of North Korean soldiers are fighting and dying in Ukraine.
Yeah, it did seem to come out of nowhere.
Right, and when you dig into the sources of these claims, they often rely on really flimsy anecdotal evidence.
Like what?
Things like notes that were supposedly found on dead soldiers.
No, seriously.
Yeah, and the author argues that this kind of information is super easy to fabricate and is probably being used for propaganda purposes. It makes you wonder if these claims are intentionally outlandish just to make Russia look even worse.
Yeah, to paint them as this global threat that's allied with rogue states like North Korea.
Exactly. And they even make fun of Zelensky's claims that he's captured North Korean soldiers who don't speak Korean.
They don't speak Korean.
Yeah, supposedly they just communicate through nodding.
That's bizarre.
It's like something out of a spy movie.
Right. So are these soldiers actually North Korean or are they something else?
It's a mystery.
And are they being forced to fight or are they there voluntarily?
So many questions.
It all seems very suspicious.
But the point is that even if these claims are totally made up, they still have an impact.
Right. They shape how people perceive the conflict.
And they have geopolitical implications too.
Because if North Korea really is involved, it could escalate things dramatically.
Exactly. It could even draw other countries into the war.
It's a slippery slope.
And it reminds us that we've seen these kinds of unfounded claims used to justify military interventions in the past.
Yeah, history's full of examples.
So the French article is really urging us to be cautious and to think critically about the information we're being fed.
To question everything.
Exactly, because in the age of information warfare, the truth can be very elusive. So we've got Trump potentially shaking things up globally.
Yeah.
And we've got this war in Ukraine, and nobody seems to know what's really going on.
That's a lot.
Really makes you think.
About what?
About how we can even navigate this crazy information landscape.
Right. How do we know what to believe?
Exactly. There's so much noise and so many people trying to manipulate us.
It's overwhelming.
It really is. So how do we sift through it all and find the truth?
Well, I think the first step is to be aware of our own biases.
Our biases.
Yeah, you know, those preconceived notions we all have that can shape how we interpret information.
Oh, like we tend to see what we want to see.
Exactly. And we gravitate towards information that confirms our existing beliefs.
So we need to be more conscious of those biases.
Absolutely. And then we need to actively seek out diverse perspectives.
You mean viewpoints that challenge our own beliefs?
Exactly. It's about getting out of our echo chambers and exposing ourselves to different ways of thinking.
So read news from different sources, listen to podcasts with different viewpoints.
Exactly. And talk to people who disagree with you.
Even if it's uncomfortable.
Especially if it's uncomfortable, because that's how we grow and learn.
It's about expanding our understanding and realizing that there's usually more than one side to every story.
Right. There's rarely a simple black and white answer.
And we need to be questioning everything we see and hear.
Don't just take things at face value.
Exactly. Ask questions like, who's presenting this information? What are their motivations? What evidence are they using?
And is there another side to the story that's not being told?
Right. Because in the digital age, it's so easy to manipulate information.
Images, videos, even audio can be faked or distorted.
So we need to be skeptical.
Absolutely. Trust but verify, as they say.
It takes effort, but it's so important.
Our ability to think critically is more crucial now than ever before.
Well said. So as we wrap up our deep dive into these two really fascinating articles,
Yeah, they were definitely thought-provoking.
I want to leave you with one last thought.
Okay.
We've talked about Trump and the global economy, the war in Ukraine, the rise of propaganda and disinformation.
It's a lot to process.
But what if the real battleground of the future isn't physical territory, but the control of information itself?
Wow, that's deep.
What if the most powerful weapons aren't bombs and missiles, but narratives, algorithms, and the ability to shape what people believe?
It's kind of scary when you think about it.
It is, but it's something we need to be aware of.
Because the information landscape is becoming more and more contested.
And the stakes are incredibly high.
Our ability to discern truth from falsehood, to think critically and independently, that's what's going to determine our future.
It's a call to action for all of us to be more informed, more engaged, more vigilant.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, stay curious, stay skeptical, and stay informed.